Carrion is what's known as a reverse horror game, wherein you play the monster, the horror, the antagonist. Two of those are technically correct, however, the third can be debated. Developed by a Poland-based indie dev studio called Phobia Game Studio, and published by Devolver Digital, we play as an amorphous blob of tentacles on a mission to consume, evolve, and escape. On the surface, Carrion may seem like just a fast-paced gore fest, but there's a bit more to gameplay than just that. And there's a story there, if you pay attention. We begin by escaping a containment tube in the BSL-4 research ward. At this point in the game, our main goal is to not be here. There's only one avenue of escape at the moment, so that's where we head. In the next room, we note scientists in hazmat suits, and others in civilian clothing working on computers. You, playing some video game? They scream in terror upon seeing you, though they're safe from us for now. Our first kill is a woman just trying to relieve herself. It's a hell of a way to go. I guess it's good that there's nothing left of her body. I think her family would hate to see the epitaph on her tombstone. After consuming that sweet entire human body, our health and mass increase. So we've learned something. Eat human, get stronger. After devouring more humans in a rampage of chaos and gore, we find ourselves at the sealed door. There's a crevice we can stuff ourselves into and deposit a fleshy nest-like structure that spreads far enough to breach the door. We'll be doing this quite often for doors that take us into new areas, and they serve as both a health and mass refill, as well as a save point. Once we travel through, we'll find ourselves in a new area called the Military Junkyard. Traveling through, we'll find a switch to pull, which suggests that the Carrion isn't just a mindless monster. It's intelligent enough to understand how switches and levers work. The facility is now well aware of your escape and subsequent dangerous nature.
Hey, we don't take kindly to your types in here. Now, calm down, Skeeter. They ain't hurting nobody.
Meaning, escape isn't gonna be a cakewalk. Further in, we'll find the DNA tube that allows us to learn the arachnopsis spider shit. The web skill, something that has the dual purpose of hitting otherwise inaccessible levers and enwebbing our foes to incapacitate them for a short period of time, leaving them vulnerable to attack. There are some areas that are inaccessible in our current form, so after finding 3 places to spread our influence, the door will be breached and we can move on into the next area. As soon as you're in the new area, you'll spot the material analyzer. Slither on in there, and as it activates, it sends us into our first flashback. That's right, a flashback. The scene begins with showing 3 people exiting out of a chopper. They are researchers from Realist Science and will be controlling the lead. We proceed to an abandoned facility known as the Derelict and begin descending into its depths. As we go, the researcher makes note on patches of antediluvian moss and an unidentified species of tubifex worm. This is something we'll look more into in the theory section, but for now, just keep it in mind. Next to it is also a disorganized mass of bones and dry tissue. This flashback concludes with them blasting through the far left wall and proceeding forward. Once we're returned to the present, we'll make our way to the uranium mines. Here is where we'll first encounter the soldiers. They are far more of a threat to us than the others we've seen so far. Their energy shield not only protects them, but damages us, and it cannot be broken. You'll have to grab them from behind, below, or above. Trying to go face to face isn't gonna work out in our favor here. We unfortunately cannot eat these guys either, as their armor is apparently too much for our teethies. But that armor doesn't protect them from the blunt force trauma of being thrown into walls or vigorously shaken like the toy of a particularly energetic dog. Past them is a new DNA containment chamber, Xyphoria. A skill that lets us use great force to bash through those previously unbreachable barriers. It also works great on enemies. By learning this, we've also increased our mass to the next level, and we now have far more eyes and 4 toothy maws. As we continue on, we'll see another scrolling notice telling the employees that the hazardous waste landfill below the military junkyard hasn't been breached, and all survivors of the uranium mining team should go there. You know shit has hit the proverbial fan when it's safer to be in a hazardous waste landfill than, well, anywhere else. Heading into the breach takes us to another part of the area. Some rooms are familiar, but with our newfound powers, we'll be unlocking new sections. In one of these, we'll get the echolocation DNA, which allows us to locate any edible corpses we've left behind. If you've left any behind. In this next section, we'll be moving into the marshlands. In this area, we'll encounter a new threat. These Wheatley-looking drone things.
And it's not out of the question that you might have a very minor case of serious brain damage.
They can also shield themselves, but it's easy enough to find a vulnerable area to latch onto them and bash them against the environment, quickly putting them out of commission. In this same room, we'll find another analyzer and be treated to the second flashback. In this one, we'll be going even further into the derelict. Right off the bat, we find a human skeleton whose cause of death was massive head trauma. How do you figure that, huh? How do you figure that? Further down, we'll find a lever missing a rod. We'll need to find that rod in order to get any further. As we fall down a shaft, we'll see something interesting. There's evidence of the creature here, showing what looks like teeth and spreading tentacles, as well as the amniotic goop we've seen before. Also, there are calcified remains of a cyclopean entity of unknown origin. Well, isn't that interesting? Oh, and the rod's here too. Once the rod has been placed in the lever and the team has passed the blockage,
Oh shit!
we come upon another familiar sight. A cocoon resting in a pool of that amniotic fluid. Put a pin in that one too. Once the researcher touches the cocoon, the flashback ends. As you slither and undulate your way through vents and canals, you'll eventually happen upon soldiers with flamethrowers. These can do some damage to us as the flames won't go out until you submerge yourself in water. It's not quite our Achilles heel, but definitely the closest thing to it. This level is also where the puzzliness begins to really make itself apparent. The further you go, the more you'll encounter, ramping up in complexity. Not that they'll get difficult, mind, but a tad bit more intricate in what you'll need to do to get past them. Here you'll find the photokinesis ability, which lets you turn invisible for a short amount of time. This allows you to slip by those laser sensors and get the drop on enemies. In the Leviathan Reef, we find the Hydrophilia DNA skill, which automatically turns our form into these separate worm things that allows us to get past barriers like these. And in the Realist Science HQ area, we'll gain the ability for parasitism, which will allow you to take control of humans with a special mass of tentacles. This is a very helpful ability because you can possess any human, alive or dead, and make them open otherwise inaccessible doors, turn off weapon traps, clear certain obstructions, and even clear out a room for you, barring they don't get their ass handed to them first. The next and last material analyzer is located in the Highlands region. In this flashback, we're back in control of our usual guy, but things have changed. He awakens from laying on a catwalk, and even though we notice his colleagues are in pretty bad shape, dead, they're dead, he has no reaction. I say this because we don't even get a prompt to examine them, thus he must have no interest in it. At this point, we're now heading back up out of the derelict. We run into a locked door we need a key for, and on our way to get the key, we see one of those Wheatley drones on a chain. It can't hurt us, but it is an obstacle, and in order to get past it, we'll have to take that key back to the locked cell door and grab the stun gun from the long-gone corpse. We use this just the one time to decommission the drone and continue on up. Along the way, we release a few more inert drones in order for the chain door to release, thus letting us out. It's night before we make it outside, and in the distance we can hear the drone of a helicopter. Moving forward, we pass some patrolling soldiers and come upon a chopper we arrived in. It's bloody, signifying something went down out here while we were busy down below. However, before we can get any further, a drone begins scanning us, and yeah. I think we can confidently say that the lead researcher was hosting our creature friend. As I said before, that was the last of the flashbacks, but that isn't the end of the story. though you'll have to reach the end to get that last and final clue. However, before we dive into that, there are still a few more powers and enemies we've yet to come across. Harpogoria is the last of the bulking up skills. You're large and in charge here, complete with red eyes and now 5 mouths. Or is it 6? I can't remember. It's 5 or 6 definitely. It's got a lot of chompers is what I'm trying to say. And of course, the ability to send out a destructive vortex of Sarka's harpoons. This deals some awesome damage, and you can pull objects like these plugs when retracting. It helps when coming across mech enemies too, though I will say these things aren't as difficult as you would think. If you stay in their crosshairs, then yeah, they can absolutely shred you. But it isn't difficult to pull the pilot out of the seat and chomp them down. No pilot, no mech. Keratosis is a skill you can use in your largest form that forms a temporary shield around you. It can help in those chaotic melees, but its best use is for those puzzle elements. At some point you will come across these explosive harpoon traps. Without this shield, they're a one-shot kill. There's no surviving it no matter how high your health is. However, with it, you won't be harmed a bit. You can utilize this gimmick when you find these impenetrable blocks. None of your abilities can touch these, but if you allow yourself to be harpooned, and if you're quick enough, the explosion will break the barrier. Just remember to keep that shield up. You can quickly reach the conclusion of this game from this point, as you'll have a couple of tough areas to get through, but once you breach that door, you'll have access to the beginning area, and with all our newfound skills, we can get to all those areas we couldn't when first starting. The main thing you'll find here is one last DNA tube, one last skill to learn, a second parasitism. The description says no data available, but you'll quickly find out that you're now in the form of someone very familiar, and you can't change back. From here, we're just walking to freedom. So, if you don't want to finish the game yet, stop there. If you want, you can go through the facility and grab any extra skills you missed for those achievements, or if you're a completionist. Also, all of your skills are ported over to the DLC Christmas special, The Greatest Time of the Year. So that's a good reason to go back and get the rest of them. Also note that I haven't listed every ability available. There are 11 in total, consisting of 3 offensive, 3 defensive, 3 utility, and 4 bonus skills. Now, let's go over the evidence and get into some theories. So, unsurprisingly, there are quite a few theories, or variations of them, about the story and ending of Carrion. It can be pretty vague, so a lot is left up to interpretation. So let's take a look at that evidence. Starting with the first flashback, the derelict is not the same facility that the game takes place in. It may share similar features, but even just looking at the background tells you that these are 2 different places. One looks to be somewhere not close to civilization, lost to time until someone happened to discover it. Whereas the current one is more than likely set in Seattle, which you can tell by the view of the Space Needle. Next is the presence of antediluvian moss. Seeing as how this guy and his team probably aren't from before the 1900s, I'm almost entirely positive they're using this term to refer to the moss as very old.
Vault 13. Vault 13.
Possibly from the Pleistocene epoch, otherwise known as the Ice Age. Also note that H.P. Lovecraft used this word quite a bit in his stories, and the monster has some similarities to some of Lovecraft's creations, especially the Shoggoth. By the information gathered from multiple wikis and
Vault 13.
Shoggoths are described as
amoeba-like creatures made out of iridescent black slime, with multiple eyes floating on the surface. They are protoplasmic, lacking any default body shape, and being able to form limbs and organs at will. Being amorphous, Shoggoths can take on any shape needed, making them very versatile within aquatic environments.
Not everything from that description can apply to our creature friend. We're more red and wormy as opposed to being a black slime amoeba. However, consider the rest.
With multiple eyes floating on the surface.
Our eyes don't exactly float, but we do gain multiple eyes. more the larger we grow.
and being able to form limbs and organs at will.
We don't necessarily form traditional human limbs, and I can't say for certain on the organs. However, we are able to use our tentacles like limbs and do gain the ability to form more if we get those DNA tubes. I will admit that could just be a reach, but you know, it's fun to think about.
Shoggoths can take on any shape needed, making them very versatile within aquatic environments.
Well, that's pretty familiar once we get the hydrophilia DNA. The presence of catwalks and metal ladders could throw you off about the age of this place, but consider if we're going down that Lovecraft route. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility that these are original parts of the ancient structure, as the Elder Things were described as being very or highly advanced. In the same area, we also find an unidentified species of tubifex worm. If you know what a tubifex worm is, or have ever seen one, the similarities are there. They're red in color, tend to bunch together, and live in sediment-heavy waters like lakes, rivers, and even in sewers. Add in the fact that tubifex worms feed off of waste, plant parts, and dead animals, aka carrion. Due to the Elder Things being known for experiments or creating species, and definitely created the Shoggoths, in this lore it's possible they created their version of the Shoggoth through genetic manipulation of the tubifex worm. The scientist spots a human skeleton with what looks like most of its skull missing. We are very familiar with blunt force trauma by now. It's our bread and butter after all. Though normally we wouldn't leave a body behind. In the next flashback, we saw evidence of the carrion in the room with the rod. Now, this looks similar to the nest we make in-game to both breach doors and save our game, only it looks old and desiccated. Then there's the presence of that goop we use to purge and store our mass lumps when we need to size down for gameplay mechanics. The presence of calcified remains of an unidentified cyclopean entity is intriguing and also a little confusing. We could take it at face value, meaning our researcher is saying there was a large one-eyed creature.
Look, we both said a lot of things that you're going to regret.
Or it's possible he's using the term just to mean large or giant. When looking closely at the remains, it's honestly difficult for me to interpret what they could possibly be. Is this the remains of the game's version of the Elder Things? Is this just an Easter egg? Or is it something else entirely?
Gary!
Then there's the room with the cocoon and the cocoon itself. If you've noticed, there are 3 crystals in the room hanging from above, along with some human skeletons. This isn't the only place they're located, we saw them in a previous room as well. They aren't like the other crystals in the area, they look to be more purposefully placed on these upside down pedestals. My research only turned up one link to the Crystals of the Elder Things, which were created for the Call of Cthulhu RPG, and were described as containers constructed to harness magical powers so that they can be used to bind Shoggoths to their will. This might just be a design choice, it might be something else entirely. If anyone has any ideas on these things though, I would be interested to hear. The cocoon itself looks an awful lot like the mass lumps we leave behind when shrinking down, and it's even in the same type of liquid. In the third flashback, we see the scientist's colleagues already dead and the cocoon itself is gone. It's interesting that their bodies are still wholly intact, not something we normally see when playing as the creature. However, our lead scientist is still alive and without question proceeds to exit the derelict. But before that, in the section where we get the stun gun, we can obviously see that this is a prison of some kind. Then there's the stun gun itself. How did it get there? How did the skeleton get there? A stun gun doesn't seem like an ancient weapon, but then again, maybe it's advanced for their time. Or is this person just a previous explorer that got caught in a nasty situation? I have no clue, but it's just odd to me. So is the fact that there are the same drones that Realist Science uses at its own facility. Why are these drones here? Where did they come from? Are they ancient tech that Realist repurposed for themselves, or is this just reusing assets? I highly doubt it's the latter because they stand out like a sore thumb here. Once outside, remember the helicopter with blood on it? Where did that blood come from? Certainly not us. It was there before we got there.
You're lying, Morgan.
At this point, I would say that it signifies the presence of another creature, or at least the presence of a piece of the same creature. As I mentioned before, the cocoons look a lot like the mask we shed. Perhaps it's possible that the monster we are, who is wearing these scientists like a fleshy meat suit, came from the mask deposited by the monster who caused some havoc before we arrived. After all, we don't know for sure that our mask wouldn't trigger an infection if a human touched it, because we've never seen a human touch it, mostly because we eat them before they get the chance. It's also possible that they are just two separate creatures of the same species. As far as how the creature came to be in the first place, I don't have any concrete evidence on that either. As I mentioned before, the Elder Things are said to have created the Shoggoth. Maybe something similar happened here? Some have also theorized that the creature came from space, mostly due to the scene at the very end of the game that shows a shooting star, which could be a nod to it being otherworldly. But keep in mind that the Elder Things are technically otherworldly beings that came to Earth, so it could be referencing that. Or maybe it has nothing to do with it. Now, as for the infection part, I wouldn't say it's like a normal infection. It's more like the creature stuffed itself inside this guy's head to control him. It does have the ability to compress itself into pretty tight spaces even when in a larger form, so it's not out of the question. Plus, if you are to take the short comic that comes with the deluxe edition as canon, it shows the creature controlling a human well enough to quickly learn how to speak through him, and eerily enough it states that it absorbs the desires of those it assimilates. And was smart enough to stage the whole interview to figure out the best way to get into the city without human intervention. There's also a bit about if it absorbed enough people or creatures that wanted to kill it, would it kill itself? We do not get an answer. To add to this, there is an official animated launch trailer that shows it doing a similar thing, controlling a human by being directly inside of his head and then bursting forth. Moving on to present-day creature, we may be the, or part of the creature that burst out of the scientist. I think the theory that pieces of the creature were separated and experimented upon is a valid theory. That is a vast array of abilities for one creature to hold naturally. Also, if you look closely at the DNA tubes, you can see the matter inside looks like it could be pieces of the creature. It could also just be other experiments not related to our creatures, but they do all look the same. They might also be separate creatures of the same species. I mean, who knows how many were left in the derelict? When it comes to the last scenes in the game, getting the second parasitism ability puts us in a human body. Note that in the short story Fat Face by Michael Shea and expanded on by Chaosium for the Call of Cthulhu RPG, there's a special Shoggoth type called a Shoggoth Lord, which is an evolved variety that is more intelligent and has the ability to mimic the human form. The fact that it can open scanner doors means it passes for human enough to fool it, which is different from the third flashback, as the drone could tell that we weren't completely human. If you try to open the door yourself, you fail the scan 100%. If you possess another human and try that way, you'll pass some checks but still fail. This is more than likely because we're controlling that human, and the scanner detects our form presence. It's only when we assimilate the human DNA are we able to become human enough to pass the checks and open the door. And then of course there's the end and theories on what happened afterwards. Did the creature now in human form go off and try to live like a human? Or is it just using this ability to be able to survive in order to continue to spread, grow, and evolve? According to the comic, it seems like it's probably the latter, as it figures out the best way to get into and travel the city would be through the sewers. And it shows the creature back in its spaghetti tentacle form. All of that depends on whether this comic is canon, or just one possibility of an ending, or maybe an AU. So with all that evidence, let's try to piece together a ramshackle theory. I'm gonna let James read this part because my voice is tired, and I'm paying him for a reason. I'm not actually paying him, but don't tell him that.
The derelict is an ancient alien construct. Long ago, these aliens created the creature through experimenting with the species of Tubifex worm. The ancient aliens died off due to climate change, or due to their creation rebelling and killing them. Between then and the first flashback, it went into a dormant state. Relith Science arrives on scene many, many years later. While the research team is making their way through the area, a creature has awoken and began making its way to the surface. Sometime between the first and second flashback, the creature shed a mass cocoon in order to proceed past some obstacle. So by the time of finding the cocoon in the second flashback, it's either still heading to the surface or has already made it. Sometime before the scientist wakes up after having touched the cocoon, the original creature has already reached the surface and was subsequently disposed of. Now, the part of it left in the cocoon has hijacked the scientist and is also making its way out of the derelict. It makes it far enough to get past the humans. However, due to it probably just riding in the skull of its human host and not actually assimilating his DNA, it's quickly discovered and is also taken down. Relith Science collected samples of the creature and took it back to their facility, as well as integrating some of the ancient technology they found in the derelict. After an unknown period of time, the creature gains the strength to break out of its containment. It manages to eat enough biomatter, humans, to regain more strength in order to be able to survive longer. It absorbs the DNA of the other experiments Relith has been working on and assimilates it into its own genetic code. At some point, another of its kind, either the first creature that tried to attack the helicopter or a piece of itself that gained its own sentience, broke free and went its own way. The last DNA sample it absorbs is of the scientist from the flashback. Since it has assimilated his DNA, instead of just hijacking his body, it can now morph itself into his likeness and seem human enough to pass through the scanners. As for why it couldn't do that with the other humans, eating, controlling, and assimilating are all different. If it inherits the desires of creatures it assimilates, then it would be better not to assimilate something that wants to kill it. As the scientist was out of commission and possessed before the events went down, he would not have the desire to kill the creature. As for what happens afterward, it's anyone's guess. From what we've seen, the creature and humans don't get along. However, that could have just been a defense mechanism. If the creature takes on the desires of those it assimilates, then that even further muddies the waters, as we have no idea what the scientist's desires were. It's all ambiguous at best. One piece that wasn't included in this theory is the presence of human remains in the derelict. Bonnie didn't include it because she has no idea why they're there. Maybe they were servants, maybe they were fodder, maybe they were previous explorers, or maybe orchestrated the whole thing. They obviously belong somewhere in the story, but there's too many maybes and not enough evidence that she found to say what part they played. I think she doesn't know what she's talking about.
And that's my theory. You thought I was gonna say... It's fun. I've never played a game as a tentacle monster before, and I have to say my first experience has been a blast. You can move pretty fast with all those extra limbs, and the elasticity is both enjoyable to experience and look at. You can undulate, slither, crawl up any surface, swing yourself around, turn into a bunch of separate worm things and swim around. I think they knocked movement out of the park on this one, both visually and just the feel of it. Your movement is more nimble when you're small, and you can be somewhat cumbersome when you're large, and both have their purposes. I'm glad they made the powers and movement tied to your size, as it gives you a reason to not just be big and tanky all the time. Though, I do love being able to turn a fight into just utter gore-tastic chaos. Maybe that says something about me, but I don't care. It feels good to just rampage through your enemies sometimes. Level design fit perfectly with the monster's physics, with omnidirectional paths branching off, which makes good use of us being able to climb up walls just as easily as we can move along the ground. You feel both a little clumsy, but extremely mobile at the same time. You are an amorphous blob of tentacles and teeth after all. The gore factor is good. You have blood and bile raining down all over the place when you're ripping enemies to pieces. It even drips off of you onto other surfaces when you move about. On that note, being able to rip bodies in half and even yank the head off of someone is both entertaining and satisfying. Also, being able to fling them around is hilarious to me, and I will do it long after they're dead just because it makes me giggle on the inside. Also, eating people is fun. Give me a game where I can eat humans whether I'm human myself or not, and I'm happy. Don't deny me my power fantasies. The mix of abilities, which allow you to slow down and be a sneaky surprise monster, is well integrated. One of my favorite things to do is mind control someone to do the work for me. Another is squeezing myself underneath them and then bursting out from the floor to catch them by surprise. It doesn't always work out, but when it does, it can be pretty satisfying. There are enough enemy variations for the length of the game. You'll probably finish this anywhere from 5 to 7 hours generally, so you'll probably see a new enemy variation every other level-ish. The fact that it isn't just a visual difference, but you also have to change your tactics for each one lends to a little bit of strategizing. You can't go after the drones the same way you do these guys, and you have to be very careful with that flamethrower. The puzzle areas serve as a good break from the action. I personally don't think they take away from it. And from a story perspective, shows that the creature can be pretty clever. They aren't too hard, but they do require a little bit of thought and give us some use to some of those abilities we might not use much during melees. Environmental interaction is great. You can destroy just about anything not part of the building itself. Ripping doors off, trashing computers and shelves, pulling light bulbs off and throwing them aside. It all provides a visceral pleasure, almost tactile in nature. Plus, you can throw stuff at enemies. Visually, I love the pixel graphic style. I might be a little biased because I love making art using this form, but I will say that not every game always does it justice, and not every game should have this style. However, I couldn't imagine this game in anything other than the style it's in. I think they did amazing with the lighting too, and the little details, which just makes the ambience pop. They really brought out that 80s sci-fi horror vibe. The fire looks especially cool, and it even boils any water it happens to touch, including forming steam when you're on fire and have to douse yourself. Any scene in this game would look cool as a background, or a poster. And you know, I for one actually need more posters on my walls because you know what? Screw having boring plain walls with tasteful art thrown up there. Give me garish neon signs, give me dogs playing poker in Technicolor, give me... Sorry, I went off on a tangent. But yeah, I like the art style. Game sound is not only serviceable, but well done. The sounds of switching levers, these hydraulic-like things opening and closing, the way these chains rattle when you brush against them. The sound of blood hitting the surface, it's all very nice. And if you've ever noticed, sound is muted when you're underwater, and I thought that was a nice touch. They also made monster movements perfect with lots of little pats and swishes as its tentacles move about to keep it locomotive. Although, one of the roars is funny. It sounds kind of like a chicken. As for music, I'm not an expert. In fact, I'm far from it. I've made a few multi-second long sound clips for my projects, but a music maker I am not. But I have listened to music, and I think the music fits perfectly with the game. It's just as chaotic as the gameplay. You get the low ambient tracks when you're moving about, and then the high energy ones when you're entering into a fray. I mean, a little metal probably would have been a good idea too, but that's mostly personal taste. The soundtrack is good. As you can tell, I really love this game. It feels like something I've been wanting to play for a long time, but could never find the right description for. This isn't one of your super difficult type of games. This is, all in all, a power fantasy game. If you want to be able to move really quickly, bounce around, tear shit up, just go hog wild, then this is the game for you. And sometimes, you know, we need that. Well, maybe some people don't, but me personally, I like different games. I don't want every game to be the same. I don't want the same experience every single time. I mean, I want a good experience, but maybe sometimes I want something difficult. Maybe I want to be stealthy. Maybe I want a puzzle game. Maybe I want an RPG. Maybe I just want a walking sim. Maybe sometimes I just want to tear some shit up. If the price point is the only problem you have with it, it'll go on sale, I promise you. Just give it some time, it will go on sale. With that said, what do you all think about it? If you've played it, what did you find fun about it, or is there something in particular you didn't like? I'd be interested in hearing your theories on the story and ending of this game, and do you have any information that could fill in those gaps that I missed? Here's the obligatory like and subscribe, it helps the channel grow. I know it's a lot to ask, just one video in on the new channel, but it doesn't hurt to ask, right? Anyway, that is the end of this video. So, thanks for watching the Midnight Goat. This is a really bad channel name. Anyway, bye.
I expect my payment to be in the form of a money order. Make it out to Jimmy the Serpent. I have powerful friends. Very powerful friends.